Friends, we're coming to the end of the third week of our journey toward Easter. It's been a great journey so far. We've had reflections from Peter along the way. We've had reflections from Brian. And I have a reflection for us today on Easter and government. And the text that I want to frame this around is Matthew 4, 8 and 9. And it's the third temptation of Jesus. Again, the devil took Jesus to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." As I've thought about this particular temptation over the years, I've come to see more and more how serious a temptation it is. As we go through this life, we experience life in a fallen world. But not only that, we also experience life governed by fallen people. And the decisions that they make, or the decisions that they don't make, or the decisions that they defer, can cause incredible damage and harm to people who have no control over it. We look at poverty in the world and we say, man, somebody should do something about that. We look at human trafficking, child sex trafficking, and human exploitation. We say, man, somebody should do something about that. Why can't we fix that? And we look at an economic system that makes it very hard for people to sometimes get by working one job, sometimes working two jobs, sometimes working three jobs, and it's still not enough. People living in poverty and really struggling to get ahead. And we say, man, why can't we fix this? Who will do something about this? And while giving a nod to those in our government who do their jobs and to do them well, even at the best of times, there's often much still left to be desired. And on regular times, or in the worst of times, we are so frustrated by what we see in our world, and we long for better government. I think that's something we've all experienced. And so we see in this temptation, Jesus is given an incredible opportunity. And if we feel provoked by the evils that we see, by the lack of wisdom and how it affects people negatively, how it hurts people, how it damages people, how missed opportunities. If we feel those things, how much more did Jesus feel those things as he looked at the poor around him? I mean, here he is about to start his ministry. And I wonder if flooding through his mind, he'd already been to the temple, and he'd seen all the poor and the sick and the lame on the outskirts, perpetually in that place. And I wonder if he'd seen the way the Romans oppressed people in their pagan system and their worship of false gods, and how that worship enslaved people to false thinking. And I know he'd seen people hurt, wounded, oppressed, violated, exploited, and whole systems and governmental structures that support that, willingly or unwittingly. Jesus saw it and he felt it at a level deeper than any of us. We experience, in our sinfulness, we still experience righteous anger and indignation. And we've had a lot of that in the last year, whether justified or not. But Jesus would have sensed that more than anything. Not only the anger and the frustration, but also the sorrow and the sadness of living in a broken world and living with broken people, in broken government and broken leadership. And in this third temptation, it's all there for him on a platter. What will you do, Jesus? Think about it. Think about the exploitation that you could end. when all of this is in your authority? Think of the poor, Jesus. Think of how you could lift them from their poverty. Think about it. Think about how you could reform the Roman Empire and all the empires of the world. You could reform their worship, their politics, their economics, their civic life. It'd be heaven on earth, Jesus. Think of the people. Think of all the good you're doing them. It'd be glorious. You'd rescue so many people, Jesus, if you just took control. If you bowed down and I gave them to you, you could have them. And as we're walking toward Easter, one of the things that we see is just how unfruitful Jesus' efforts sometimes seem. How ineffective his ministry was at times. And how misunderstood he was. And in that temptation, in that moment, I wonder if he knew what it was going to be like, seeing those poor, broken people, seeing the oppressed, day after day, week after week. Healing them at times, yes. Often. But unable to lift them from their physical, social estate, unable to rescue all of them in that way. As we're going toward Easter, we know that Jesus turned it down. He said, no, I'm not going to take government. There's something different in mind. And in his death and resurrection, he established a new government, a different kind of government, a government that he didn't take government from the world. He formed his own government in the midst of it, and it is growing and expanding, and of the increase of his government there will be no end, and it will overtake the governments of this world in time. But it wasn't the way that we might have expected he would have done it. And so when we have anger, when we have social, or when we have frustration toward government, when we have frustration toward leadership, when we have frustration toward the injustice of it all, we say, won't somebody do something about it? We need to know that Jesus turned down in this temptation that chance to seize power and to fix it and to do it right. At least in the physical, immediate, material world, he said, no. There's something greater. And I will never bow to Satan. I will never bow to darkness in order to fulfill an immediate good end. So he gave up the opportunity. And when we think about what would you do if you had control? What would you put an end to? What have you been righteously angry about? What have I been righteously angry about? Say, man, won't somebody do something about that? How can they allow that to go on? Jesus saw all of it. He saw all of that, and he had a chance, and he didn't take it, which means that his priorities are somewhere else. In the midst of all of the brokenness, in the midst of all the poor leadership, his priorities were somewhere else, and so may it be said of us as followers of Christ that our priorities are somewhere else as well. We can endure the governments of this world no matter what, because Christ has established his government of spirit and truth, his government of righteousness, and we all submit to our King as believers, and he leads us on. May it be said of us that we too will not bow to Satan. We will worship the Lord our God. We will serve him alone, serve him only. In whatever spheres of influence we're in, we will do our best to submit ourselves to the King of Kings, whose government is increasing and will fill the earth.